Just before we came on air, I spoke to Michael Oren, Israeli ambassador to the United States until last year. And I started by asking him if it was time now to accept that a military solution to the conflict cannot be achieved.
Well, it depends how you define a military solution. I think that the military aspect of the conflict is an important part of the solution. That Hamas will not willingly give up its rockets unless it's compelled to do so. And that with the proper backing, time and space, Israeli forces can remove the threat posed by Hamas tunnels under the border and put pressure on Hamas, and that will, in fact, be conducive to reaching what would be, from Israeli, Egyptian, and certainly Palestinian Authority perspective, a favorable outcome of the conflict.
But that seems to ignore the welfare and survival of the vast number of women, children, civilians inside Gaza who are bearing the brunt of your assaults.
Well, no one's ignoring the suffering of the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip. And Israel has undertaken absolutely superhuman efforts to try to minimize that suffering. But Israel is fighting against an enemy, Hamas, which has deeply dug in beneath that population, using that population as a human shield, and Hamas, which actually has an interest in provoking Israel to inflict the maximum number of Palestinian civilian casualties, because the pictures look terrible on the TV, and that immediately translates into diplomatic pressure on Israel to accept a far less advantageous ceasefire.
But, Mr. Oren, I was on the streets of Gaza last week for several days, and I have to say, the idea that these people are human shields, you see people being wounded and killed simply because strikes hit the street they're on. I mean, they are not human shields. This is a densely populated area in which there are ordinary people living ordinary lives, in as far as it's possible, in this extraordinary situation. They're not human shields.
This is a densely populated area from which 2,600 rockets have been fired at no less densely populated areas in the state of Israel. Tel Aviv is actually more densely populated than Gaza is. And it's a densely populated area from which dozens of terrorist tunnels have been dug under the border into civilian Israeli farms and kindergartens. And Hamas is doing this on purpose. Israeli forces have encountered house after house in which everyday kitchen utensils, toasters, refrigerators, have been booby-trapped. And it's booby-trapped at the time when the civilians were still in there. So Hamas is very much using the civilian population, not just as a human shield, but as a human weapon. And they use it as part of a media campaign, which is very sophisticated. It's worked again and again in the past, where Israel gets fired upon by rockets from terrorists. Israel responds. The terrorists fire from behind civilian populations. Civilians do get injured and killed.
Mr. Oren,
bad images on the television. Let me finish. This is very important.
Sorry,
John, let me finish this.
Yeah, you are describing.
You got to let me finish. If you don't let me finish, you don't understand what the war is about. That's it. I'm not trying to make a propaganda point. This is something that's happened again and again over certainly the last 10 years. It happened in Lebanon. It's happened several times in Gaza. It's the same pattern. The terrorists get the rockets, they fire them at Israel. Israel fires back. It tries not to kill and hurt civilians, but civilians do get hurt because the terrorists want that. You get images on Channel 4, and that goes immediately to the Security Council. Yeah. Israel gets its hands tied.
Mr. Oren, I really do have to have some conversation
and then the next round is even worse.
This is not a lecture. This is a conversation between the two of us. I have been in Gaza, and I have seen, and the reality is simply not as you describe. You do not see this extraordinarily mathematical deployment of people behind shields, behind the firing of rockets and the rest of it. This is nonsense. Of course the rockets are being fired, but the people exist and have to continue existing and have nowhere to go. The hospital is full of the people that you have injured, you have wounded, you have killed.
The people have been warned by extraordinary measures, by the Israeli Air Force, by the Israeli Army, which has dispersed hundreds of thousands of leaflets. It has issued hundreds of thousands of text messages, made actual phone calls to all those individuals you saw in the street. Were they able to flee those areas? Did Hamas prevent them from leaving those areas? Today, Israeli news carried a story of 20 Palestinians who tried to protest against the war and were summarily shot by Hamas. This is a vicious, medieval, racist, genocidal organization. This is not a legitimate sovereign.
Mr. Oren,
and this is an organization that's using hundreds of children to dig those tunnels.
Let's cite no worse a source than the Pope, Barack Obama, Ban Ki-moon. I know you don't like the UN, but he's there and he does a pretty good job. They're all telling you to stop and stop now. When will you stop? Because you are under increasing pressure and you're turning your state into a pariah in reputational terms. People who love Israel are in despair tonight when they see what you're doing to the reputation of the country they love.
We're pained also by the civilian life on the Palestinian side. Make no mistake about it. It is a tragedy. But it's a tragedy that we didn't bring on the Palestinians. Hamas brought on the Palestinians. The Palestinian casualties in this conflict, like the Israeli casualties in this conflict, are together victims of Hamas. Last point. This is a very fractious country. Israelis agree on just about nothing. You have close to 100% consensus backing up this military operation. Personally, in my entire life, I've never seen it. And Israel's going to do whatever it has to do to defend itself from racist, genocidal terrorists.
Michael Oren, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Israel's former ambassador to the United States, and you can read all of the eyewitness coverage of our teams on the ground and, of course, full analysis of what's happening in Gaza on our website, channel4.com/news. Kathy.
Thanks, John.